Hey, Dion, could you see all the pieces starting to be pulled together right now as y'all get ready for that, the final preseason game? But can you see all the pieces coming together now?
Oh yeah, most definitely, and it's always different when you learn in a new offense and you have new guys come in, and it's a different trust level as well. So just with them believing in us and then us working hard every day, you can see a drastic change.
Hey, Antonio, can you see all the pieces starting to pull together with this team and what you're seeing right now?
Definitely. We're steady growing. With the new offense, new OC, and new plays, but it's starting to come together. You can see it out there in pieces. We still got some things to correct, and we're getting there. We're still moving forward, though.
I know everybody will say that this is just preseason, but how big was this win?
It was a good feeling, especially in a tight game like that, to see those guys come down and close it at the end like that. And, to see those long drives, to finish with a touchdown. That's an incredible thing for anybody, and we finished it.
We got all the pieces. We're just putting it together. It's almost like a puzzle. We're putting the puzzle together. We got all the pieces. So, I'm really excited for him. I think he's gonna have a great year, and I'm just gonna help him any way possible to make sure he succeeds.
Johns Hopkins Pro Football Plus here at Washington Commanders training camp still, as we're in the last 2 days of training camp, and with me is David Harrison. And David, tell the fans who you're with again.
So I write for Sports Illustrated's FanNation, CommanderCountry.com. Also host the Locked On Commanders podcast 5 days a week as well.
Yeah, it was too much for me to remember all that, so I'll just let him say that himself. But David, the Washington Commanders played their second preseason game against the Baltimore Ravens. They're going to play their last preseason game this coming Saturday. Going back to that second preseason game, the starters were in for a whole half. So let's start with the offensive side of the ball. Yeah. What did you take from the game on the offensive side, looking at the wide receivers, the running backs, but more so, let's go to Sam Howell first, as far as how he played?
Yeah, I think what you have there is a continued display of intelligence, and I think that's really kind of what we've seen from Sam Howell throughout his time here in Washington, not just this preseason, this training camp, but also going back to Dallas. You know what I mean? I know he had the one interception, but if you go back to his performance there as a rookie, making his first NFL start, and honestly, a little bit of added pressure. It's prime time, but his father's favorite team growing up is the Dallas Cowboys. So there's a little bit of an added, familial bonus to that whole experience. And I think for the most part, you come away with that saying, young quarterback, has a lot to do, but he's very intelligent. And then this training camp, going back to mini camp, OTAs, all of the scrimmages, joint practices, you've just seen a lot of smart decision making from Sam Howell. And Sam will criticize himself. He took credit for the one sack against the Cleveland Browns, took credit for both sacks against the Baltimore Ravens, even though I think most of us only give him credit for the one of the two, right? But he took credit for both and said, I've got to be better. I've got to make faster decisions, and kind of said, in the early stages of the game, he just kind of really wants to make something happen, and that leads to some of those bad decisions. So he's got to learn how to kind of tamper that stuff down. And you go back to all the comments from Coach Rivera, Coach Eric Bieniemy about how he autocorrects and immediately understands when he's making a flaw. It's almost like while Sam is on his way to the turf, he says, oh, here's why I'm getting sacked right now, and figures out how to fix it. And as long as you have that intelligent play, again, regular season, the stakes are higher, so we'll see if the decision-making stays even keel despite those raised stakes. But if you have that, then this team is going to have an opportunity to compete in every game.
Yeah, you look at his numbers, 19 of 25 for 188 yards. Yep. That's pretty good for him for the time frame he was in there for the first half. And I think the coaches were able to see a lot of good things from him in that preseason game. And the question is always going to be surrounding the quarterback position for this Commanders team, because for years they haven't gotten it right. But have you saw the progressions in him when you looked at him back at the beginning, even last year, but through the training camps up until this point? What are the key things that stands out about him, as far as how he's grown?
It's just I think it's the understanding from Sam Howell. Like, you go back to North Carolina, right? And especially that last season in North Carolina, lost all of his weapons. We've all kind of talked about that. Was a surefire first-round pick the year before. But then De'Ami Brown and all the rest of his weapons, they leave for the NFL, and he's kind of left alone. And all of a sudden, his stock really just kind of plummets.
Yeah.
And I think in North Carolina that last year, he had to be the playmaker. He had to be the Steph Curry of point guards. We always talk about quarterbacks being point guards. He couldn't just pass the ball like Chris Paul to a KD or to whoever else and let them score.
He didn't say Magic Johnson, but I'll let him slide.
You know what? That's true. But he almost had to be more of the Magic Johnson, right? Yeah. So Magic could facilitate, but Magic also had the ability to take over games. And Sam had to take over a lot of games for North Carolina. Here you kind of see him living within the system and understanding he's got Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Curtis Samuel, B-Rob, all these guys, so I can just facilitate and let the points come. And when you look at what's happening on the field, I mean, 24 points in 7 drives.
Yeah.
On average, NFL teams usually get around 12 drives per game. So if you take that 7, extrapolate it to 12, that's 48 points. You're averaging probably about 38 to 42 points in a game simulation. Now, again, it's preseason, so a big grain of salt with that, but that is a lot of production. But when you watch Sam Howell, you're not looking at a quarterback saying, "Ooh, he's out there trying to produce." He's not. He's just living within the framework, and they're producing anyway.
Yeah, so you're talking about the quarterback position. Let's go to the wide receiver position also, because they're loaded. Terry McLaurin with the toe situation. We don't know how that's going to play out because, you know, a toe injury, they said it was a spring. It's not, the x-rays came back negative, but still you don't know about foot injuries. But they're loaded right there. De'Ami Brown has really had a tremendous camp, and then you've got Curtis Samuels, and you know, that list go on. But who are some of the other guys that have surprised you? Because it's only going to be about 6 slots. And Mitchell Tinsley is one guy that's people are starting to talk about a little bit more, but is Dax Mills out? What are what's your view on the wide receiver position?
I feel like right now that Dax Milne is safe. You know, coming into OTA's minicamp, training camp, I think we all had this sense that Dax Milne's job might be in jeopardy. And I even talked to special teams coordinator Nate Katzer at one point and asked him, is that narrative of Dax Milne being in jeopardy true? He said, yeah, absolutely. His spot is up for battle. His spot is up for grabs. I think I won't say the issue, but where other players have kind of fallen short is Mitchell Tinsley, you know, had a really great OTA period, really great mini camp, has had some flashes in training camp. But those 2 catches he had the opportunity to make in that preseason game against Baltimore that he didn't come up with, those are going to loom large on whether or not he makes this roster or whether he doesn't make this roster. Kaz Allen, on the other hand, had some really solid catches down the stretch in that final run for the win over Baltimore. But in training camp and in practices, we've seen him struggle with some concentration drops and things like that. Where Dax Milne is really cashing in right now is, as boring as he is to the fans,
special teams,
he's consistent across the board. And at the end of the day, this coaching staff knows who they have in Dax Milne. Let's look at the 6th receiver spot. If you need your 6th receiver, that means you're in a bad spot. That means you've lost. I don't even want to say names because I don't want to speak it into existence. But that means you've lost some guys. So do you want, as a coaching staff, if you're down to your 5th, 6th receivers, you got a young quarterback, you got some running backs and tight ends, do you want the consistent guy that you know what to expect? Or do you want the guy that could perform but could also have some concentration drops? I think everybody knows the answer is you want that consistency. So I think Dax Milne might be safe. We'll see what happens these last 2 days and preseason against Cincinnati. But as it stands right now, I do think Dax makes the roster.
Let's go to the tight end position because Logan Thomas, you know, has been out for some weeks. Had a strong camp, and you know what you get with Logan Thomas, and they need Logan Thomas. But Colt Turner has really turned it up a little bit, and they're expecting a lot out of him. But Hodges has had a lot of drops too. We talk about drops. He's had a whole bunch. He could be on the bubble. What's your take there?
Yeah, that's rough for me to talk about because I'm an Arizona State guy, and Curtis Hodges is my only. He's my only Sun Devil here. So first off, I got to give the Sun Devil pride. But yeah, Curtis has not done well for himself. You know what I mean? He has definitely hurt his chances to make this roster. I mean, they still may decide to keep 4 tight ends. When you look at this Washington Commanders offense, they're running a lot of 2 tight end sets. They're even going after some 3 tight end sets. So that alone may keep him on this roster. But even if they're considering keeping all 4, they definitely want to see some better practice performances. They want to see a better performance against the Cincinnati Bengals to kind of justify and validate keeping him, because right now he has been struggling just a little bit. But Colt Turner is kind of the opposite of last year, right? So last year he was having a lot of flashes during practice, but then we got to the games, and granted he struggled. He suffered an injury short way through training camp, so that certainly hurt. But he was making a lot of practice plays, but not a lot of game plays. This year, we've actually seen him have some fairly rough days in practice where he's had some drops, and we've talked to him about. I know you've talked about that. I've talked to him about that. But then in the games,
game time,
he's
he
turning
shows
on.
up.
So it's almost like the Taylor Heineke effect, where Taylor in practice, let's be honest, in practice, a lot of times we're like, I don't know about this guy. But you show up to the game, you're like, there's Taylor. You know what I mean? That's the Taylor that everybody loves. So Colt Turner this year, and look, if you got to choose between being a practice player and a gamer, you want to be a gamer.
Give me a gamer all the time. Running back positions, we know that Brian Robinson, Antonio Gibson, Williams, those are sure guys in. But Patterson, is he on the bubble? Because, you know, there's not enough room for a whole bunch of people.
No, there's not. I don't think Jaret Patterson's going to make this roster. I think it's a spoiler riches.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And JP's a good dude, and I know the room loves him, the coaches love him, and he loves being here. And I think he will be practice squad. But I think that's where he's going to go. C-Rod, Chris Rodriguez has come on really strong. There's a lot of raw potential in him. He's far from a finished product, but I think there's already things that EBC that he can use Chris Rodriguez for in this offense.
Although
as
he put it on the carpet, but he
did,
made up
and
for it.
That's rough, but he did make up for it later on. So we'll see how that continues to play out. But Jaret Patterson, I mean, you would love to say that there's a spot for him on this roster, but I don't know that he does anything enough that doesn't already exist in the running back room to validate keeping him. Wouldn't hate it, by any means to see him on the roster.
But you
I
got
just
Robinson
don't know if they can justify
and
it.
Gibson, Williams, and then Rodriguez.
Yeah.
I mean, those are your running backs right there. But let's talk about the offensive line, because coming in to camp and even throughout last year, the offensive line has been the Achilles heel.
Right.
I mean, they when you look at them now, they struggled in camp, across the line for the most part. But they showed some flashes up at the joint practice with Baltimore that they stepped it up against the first team defense of the Ravens, and they did pretty good in that preseason game against the Ravens. But how do you see them overall, and what's the hiccups there for you?
Yeah, so the way I like to put it is it's a work in progress, but it's not a work in regress, right?
Yeah.
I think that's the key here, is that this offensive line is continuing to grow. They're not taking steps backwards. So you see them from the beginning, and we're all kind of pointing out, the fans are here, so they see the kind of the rough play and the constant pressure that Sam Howell is under in practice and all those things. But then by the time you get to Cleveland, it's a little bit better. They had some rough moments. Certainly the holds, on Andrew Wiley don't help and other things. But outside of that, and Ron Rivera pointed this out after the game too against Cleveland, they kind of picked it up and got better. And then that touchdown drive was for the most part was pretty clean. And then you get to the Baltimore joint practices, like you said, and you see not only better performance but better fight back. And I think this team is starting to fight as one, and that's incredibly important. And then you get to the game scenario, and I know the starting Ravens defense wasn't out there, but even against the backup guys, just clean performance, clean execution, and more so than the actual result of the play, guys being where they're supposed to be, knowing where they're supposed to be. There's a really, really smooth, clean block by Sadiq Charles. Sadiq Charles is kind of floating there, so he kind of checks his left tackle, but then he checks his center, and he sees his center engaged, and boom, cleans out the guy from center, Nick Gates. And that is the kind of teamwork, unity, and just constantly looking for something to do. The thing you hate seeing in offensive lineman is a guy standing there with nothing to do, and then he just stands there and says,
Look
I have
like
nothing
he's
to
lost,
do.
right?
Right. Find something to do. And Sadiq Charles did that specifically on that one play, and that's the kind of unity you really want to see from this offense.
When you look at this team as a whole on the defensive side of the ball and the offense, is all the pieces starting to come together in fitting the puzzle?
We around each other every day, and we know each other really well, and we love to play with each other, honestly.
Hey, Joey, take us through the process of you getting ready, having the opportunity to kick the winning field goal. What was going through your mind?
I've done a really good job this offseason of working on my cues to really keep me present in moments like this. So regardless if it's a PAT or a game-winning field goal, having the same operation, same mindset each time I go out. So just leaning into those, not really focused on what the kick means, but more just like my regular sequence of events when I go into kick. So
I know a lot of people say that, man, this is just preseason, but how big is this for the team to get this win?
I think, again, kind of like I mentioned earlier, for us to just keep instilling winning within this organization, and doing turnover and ownership and things like that. Coach is doing a really good job of making sure that our culture is winning, and even though it's preseason games, we're trying to go out and win every single time we get on the field.
That's about the offensive side of the ball. Let's go over to the defensive side of the ball. We know that we're set up front, but I mean, you got John Allen with a little foot injury. Also, Chase Young hasn't been in there because of little injuries there. But Sweat has had a solid. But when you look at that competition across there, Andre Jones has had a solid camp, looks good in games. Name is being called on a lot. Ron Rivera bragged about him. And then you've got C.J. Henry, Casey Toohill, and then James Smith-Williams. Those are all guys that are jarring for those last positions and everything, and all of them are good. Who's out?
I think all of those guys make the roster.